You know, we all love that idea of the chosen one, that young hero who stands up and topples a corrupt system. But if you look at actual history, well, it tells a very different and honestly a much darker story about what really happens when you hand absolute power to someone young.
I mean, think about it. From dystopian novels to epic fantasy movies, we are surrounded by stories of teenagers saving the world. It's an awesome, inspiring idea. But it really makes you wonder, where did we get this idea from? And how does it actually compare to what happened in the real world? Because yeah, when you dig into the historical record, the results are, let's just say, less heroic rebellion and more, well, pure chaos. The reality is that putting unchecked power in the hands of someone immature has led to some of the absolute strangest and most terrifying moments in history.
So let's start right there with the actual historical record. We're not talking about fictional heroes for a minute. We're talking about real teenagers who were literally handed the keys to an empire. So meet Elagabalus. He becomes the emperor of Rome at just 14 years old. His idea of a good time was, reportedly, unleashing lions on his dinner guests or dropping snakes into the gladiator crowds just to see what would happen. He basically played with people's lives until, and this should surprise no one, his own guards assassinated him. He was only 18. Or how about King Christian of Denmark? He was 16, and his advisors basically claimed he was so busy with personal pursuits that he totally neglected to rule. In fact, his chief physician was so worried about it that he wrote a whole book on what he called masturbatic insanity. Seriously.
Now, here's what's really interesting. The problem isn't just about how old you are. It's about maturity. Take Peter III of Russia. He was 34 years old, a grown man, but his behavior was just astonishingly childish. This guy was addicted to playing with his dolls. He once held a full military parade for one of them after a rat apparently tore its head off. And then he held a formal court-martial for the rat and sentenced it to death. This is such a perfect example that the real issue isn't age, it's a total lack of self-mastery.
Okay, these stories are wild, right? But they do bring up a really important question. I mean, is it really fair to put all the blame on a teenager who was never, ever prepared to rule an entire empire? Or is there something else going on here?
And this is such a crucial point, because an immature ruler, whether they're young or just act young, creates a massive power vacuum. And as history shows us time and time again, manipulative adults are always ready and waiting to rush in and fill that vacuum for their own benefit.
Believe it or not, this is not a new idea. Playwrights back in Jacobean England, we're talking over 400 years ago, were writing about this exact problem. Their plays were filled with these foolish rulers who were just surrounded by yes-men and corrupt advisors, all pushing their own villainous agendas by flattering the person in charge.
These Jacobean writers even had a name for them, greenheads. That was their word for immature leaders. And they warned that when these rulers are deciding the fate of a whole country over a few cups of wine, the kingdom is what suffers. The leaders' focus shifts to their own pleasure, and the country gets handed over to flatterers. And what does that lead to? Neglect and corruption everywhere.
So, keeping all that real-world manipulation in mind, let's circle back to our fictional teen heroes. Because when you look a little closer, you start to see this exact same dynamic playing out. It's just hidden behind that shiny myth of the chosen one.
Okay, the key idea here is something that academics call symbolic leadership. This is basically when a person stops being a person and becomes a figurehead, like a mascot or a poster child. Their so-called power isn't actually their own. It comes from the adult group that turned them into a symbol, and in doing so, usually strips them of their ability to make their own choices.
Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games is the perfect example of this. We all see her as this defiant, powerful face of the rebellion. But if you look at it through the lens of symbolic leadership, a whole different picture comes into focus. The adult leaders of the rebellion constantly use her as their poster child. They take her image, they control it, and they repeatedly take away her agency, all to serve their cause.
Now, let's contrast that with Harry Potter. When the Minister of Magic tries to pull the exact same move, calling Harry a symbol of hope, Harry immediately sees the trap for what it is. He fires back that they just want a mascot to manipulate people. By saying no, he keeps his own agency, his own power.
But Katniss, she's never really given that choice. And this quote from President Coin, the adult leader of the rebellion, it just says everything. For Coin, Katniss the person is totally expendable. All that matters is Katniss the symbol. Dead or alive, her face is all they need. It's just a chilling admission of how completely she's being used.
So, after all that, after looking at chaotic boy emperors, manipulative courts, and fictional heroes who got turned into symbols, what's the big picture here? What have we really learned about power and leadership?
Well, I think the crucial takeaway is this. The real danger isn't being young. Both history and fiction show us that the real tyranny, the real danger, comes when you give absolute power to anyone, young or old, who doesn't have the wisdom and the self-mastery to handle it. Immaturity creates a vacuum, and that vacuum always invites corruption.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? In a world that so often looks for simple, powerful symbols to rally behind, this pattern from history and literature really serves as a warning. It pushes us to look past the face of any movement and ask the really important question, who's truly holding the power, and do they have the wisdom to use it?